group, a number, talking this morning about how many times Sid has been doing this with this group. And we've settled on the number 5. This might be the 5th time that Fred has spoken. He's all of his talks really have been about the military history of the Coachella Valley. He spoke about the Desert Air Hotel, which had an airport, a runway anyway. I don't know how much of an airport, but at least it was a runway. And two runs. Okay. And we're sitting where that airport used to be. So seventh fairway. So what used to be a runway is now a golf course. Yeah. He spoke about the Salton Sea and the military history of the Salton Sea. I remember that one I was at it, and it was really very, very informative. I learned an awful lot of things I didn't know about the Salton Sea, and the part it played in World War II, and also the history of the Palm Springs Airport. But today he's going to be talking about the subject of drones. So if you'd welcome, please, Sid Burks.
Productive, walk around. Thank you. Well, when I rolled up here to the gate this morning, the security guard looked at me and he said, "Old bold pilots." I said, "Yep." I couldn't know how he tell I was a pilot just by looking at me. At any rate, we're going to talk today about the original drone. And before we get started, you got to remember that drones originally were used not like they are today as surveillance and military weapons, but they actually started out being targets for anti-aircraft practice. So the original drone was basically a target, and it replaced the concept of towing a sleeve behind the aircraft, which the brass determined wasn't very realistic. So they bought into the drone concept as an alternative to towing a sleeve behind an aircraft. Okay. So we want to talk about the original drone. And before you line up to tell me how wrong I am, it was working. Yeah. Technical difficulties. Oh,
You can get the page down.
that's not working either. I tried it. Oh, here we go.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. So we're talking about the first completely electronically radio controlled drone. It was a unanimous, so I can't even say the word, no person flying it, mass produced for the military. So there were other drones before this, but they didn't fit that criteria. And the story of the original drone is really the story about this gentleman, Reginald Denny. Mr. Denny was an actor, a director, a playwright. He actually started acting in the theater in England when he was 16 years old. And he later became a pilot and a businessman. He was also an amateur boxer. He was born in England. He was a child actor, like I said, came to the US early on, and he was a leading man in silent films. And you can see some of the films he starred in. If you stay up late and you watch the old black and whites, you might even catch him. So when World War I started, he went back to England to fight the war. He completes his pilot training. He gets his ticket. He's a second lieutenant in the Royal Air Force. And for some reason, he's not flying this airplane. He's the rear gunner, and he gets injured by friendly fire. So by the time he recoups, the war is over. So he never really gets to be a pilot in the war. He comes back to the United States and he transitions to talkies. But there's a small problem. One, he's older, and two, he's got a real heavy British accent. So he goes from being the leading man to being a character actor. So he plays British Army officers and British gentlemen and things that accommodates his accent. He does hang out with a pilot group called the Black Cats. He goes into business. He has a hobby shop. He has a mail order business, which we'll talk about in a second. And he eventually becomes one of the principals of the radio plane company, which manufactures the drone. So he's the originator of the Denny Mite, which back in the days, the kids had model airplanes that they were rubber band powered because they couldn't afford a gas engine. So he came up with, not him personally, Reggie's not an engineer, he's not a mechanic, he's an actor, but he knows how to coordinate things and how to find people that can do what he needs to do. So he puts together this low-cost gas engine for model airplanes, and he sells it by mail order and does pretty well at it. He opens a hobby shop in the Hollywood Boulevard. You can see it says Reginald Denny there off the side. And he's supposed to be really good with the kids. The kid really wanted a model airplane and didn't have the money to buy one. He'd sort of give him a credit. Came up with the first drone, RP-1. And he got in partnership with this gentleman, Walter Ryder, who is an engineer who developed the engines for the drone. And by the way, Reginald didn't design the fuselage. He paid for the design somebody else made. But anyway, the two of them got together and they put together this drone. And they had a military evaluation, which didn't turn out too well because it crashed. But the military was interested enough that they, kept in touch as they developed this drone further. So like I said, the old concept was to practice firing at a sleeve towed behind an airplane, which you really never knew if you hit the sleeve or not, but you knew if you hit the airplane. The first control they used was a rotary telephone control, dial 2 for ascend, 1 for dive. Didn't work out too well. So they came up with a joystick. So this is the first joystick. By the way, look over here. Oops. Where's the button? Right there. It says shoot. That's the button that opened the parachute. And we'll talk about this more, but these things had a bad habit of going rogue on you. So, if it quit running or disappeared, you'd hit that shoot button, and the chute would come up, drop it to the ground. So here's Reggie with the joystick, and you see the big tether. So this wasn't Wi-Fi. This was, vacuum tube electronics. You see the aircraft here at the end of its launcher. So here was our wind tunnel, for what passed for one. Here's they're doing some design work. The original drone had counter-rotating props to cancel out the yaw problem. The Army didn't like that because they didn't like having to carry 2 different part numbers in their inventory. So they very soon got away from the counter-rotating props into a single prop. And Reginald, along with some investors, formed the radio plane company to manufacture the drone. So here's a more modern version, RP-5A. The Army called it an OQ-2. The Navy called it a TD-1. Can't have the same number, right? So here's another version, the OQ-2 or the TD-2. Here's the engine. By the way, you can still buy these engines on eBay. You won't find the drones themselves, but the engines pop up here and there. So here's probably the most popular version, the OQ-14, or for the Navy, the TD-3. And then they had a special version with a little bigger engine called the TD-4. By the way, one of those D's stands for Denny, who's the inventor. So the target drone was actually transported to where it was to be used by this thing here, which was a combination trailer and launcher. By the way, when they use these over in Borrego, they came down the Banner Pass. And if you're familiar with that, there's all these switchbacks. They would actually have to get out and manhandle that thing around the switchbacks. Here's one being shot down, which is what happened to most of them. They were expendable. So their purpose was to be a target. So when they got hit, you just, pointed up another drone. So here's the numbers of how many were created and some specs on them. You can see they get bigger and faster. The numbers produced, if you look here, the OQ-14, TD-3 or 4, 5,200 of them. And here's a picture of the factory where they're making them. This is in pretty close to the Van Nuys Airport. So one day, Reggie's friend, Hollywood friend, Captain Ronald Reagan, who's running a film division in LA, sends a sergeant over to his buddy Reginald's operation to take pictures of women supporting the war effort. And the sergeant is smitten by this young lady, Norma Jean Mortensen. He tells her she ought to go into modeling. I don't know what he was trying to get to, but anyway, she takes him up on it. So she loses the curls, she dyes her hair blonde, and she becomes Marilyn Monroe. Okay? And her job it shows here putting a prop on the drone. No, her job was spraying flame retardant on the drone and also inspecting the parachutes. Anyway, she gets rid of she was married to a merchant marine. She gets rid of the curls, gets rid of the red hair, gets rid of the merchant marine, and goes into modeling. The rest is history. So then they form Denny forms the radio plane company. 1948, Denny, after the war, he doesn't see any kind of a market for drones, so he sells a share in it. And in 1952, the company is purchased by Northrop, and it actually becomes the drone part of Northrop Aircraft. And later on, they dropped the radio plane, but for many years, the radio plane division of the Northrop Aircraft. So I hope this works. Got some videos here. Pardon the watermark, but it made the difference between me being able to use it for free and having to pay a lot of money. How come it's not working? It's embedded in the PowerPoint. Well, I guess we're not going to see the video. Pardon? This one right here. Here's, it's a video clip.
Which periscope film? One slide.
I don't see a number. Well, I guess we're not gonna see the videos. At any rate, there was one made by the Army and one made by the Navy. And it was interesting because in the Navy one, they're not, obviously not gonna be able to reuse the drones because they're gonna go in the drink. And it shows them coming up on the elevator, by the dozens. So they went through quite a few of them. In the Army video, it's interesting, they show the controls and there were no ailerons. All of the yaw was in the rudder. And so they show the exercising the controls, and then they show the parachute assembly coming up. Didn't figure out why to do that, huh? Right. Yeah, there you go. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So there's no audio, but it was nothing but a bunch of engine noises anyway. See, this was 1944, so this is right towards the end of the war. Use the right tool for the right job, huh? I believe this is Mr. Ryder. I think he actually helped the Army Air Force out on these things. Okay, here they are exercising the controls with a joystick. So all the controls are in the tail. Here's the parachute. There's the antenna. See, the launcher is nothing but a big slingshot. So they winch the cable back, put the drone on it. Here's the electronics. The whole back of that thing is filled with vacuum tube electronics. There's the umbilical cable. You can see a picture there. There's an operator with a whole back thing of big radio units. Launch. Takes off. So these things weren't as fast as an actual aircraft, but because of the size, you got the impression that they were. Now here's some gun crews. I think there's a clip of one getting shot down in here. Or maybe it's in the next video. We can just go on to the next video because it's just flying around.
Multiple embedded.
How did we do that last time? Mhm, okay.
How we got it before.
Somehow we did.
Should. So most of it.
Well, there's two of them. There's two
I
videos.
know, but we saw one. I just don't know how to get it. It's the embedded one.
Yeah, it's okay. All right. Guess we're not gonna see the Navy version. There's a if you're interested, there's a website maintained by this university in Australia. But whoever started it must have retired because nobody's monitoring it. But they've got just a wealth of information on Reginald Denny and the development of the drone. Okay. Any questions?
Drone that we have at Palmas.
Yes, I am. That's a later model one.
Does that look like this later model?
Yeah, it's a later model. I believe it was a Northrop drone, but I think it was Korean vintage. You can, if you want to see one of these things, they have them at the Yanks Museum out of Chino Airport. They have it at the March Air Force Base Museum, and they have it at the Pima Air Museum. You can actually see one. Those are the three closest. Yes, sir.
Repeat the question for everyone's benefit, but my question is, at what point did they go from being tethered to being wireless? You saw the antenna in the film.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The tether, it was tethered initially,
So the
correct?
tether was for the joystick. Yeah, the airplane was the top. And like I mentioned, they had a bad habit of going rogue. In fact, they were using them over here in Borrego. They would bring it up from San Diego, and they had anti-aircraft gunnery crews coming out of the base that's now Torrey Pines, Camp Callan, I think it was. And they actually there was Navy planes from the Salton Sea would monitor the drones. And if they went rogue, then their job was to shoot it down. Well, unfortunately, one Navy pilot was coming to relieve the other, and they had a midair collision over Clark Dry Lake, just outside of Borrego. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Any of the other countries have drone program like British, Germans, Russians?
I'm sorry, once more?
Any of the other countries at that time have a drone program like
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. Question was, did any other countries have a drone at that time? Any other questions? Well, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry the videos didn't. Oh, sorry. We missed one.
I just wonder, you're familiar with the Culver Cadet and Culver Turkey drone.
Yeah, in fact, I was sitting waiting to take off from the airport in Carlsbad one time, and a Culver Cadet came by and the landing gear collapsed. So, yeah, I'm familiar with those. And there were also some other airplanes that after the war, they converted to drones, but they had a chase plane that would control them. So drone technology has come a long way. We done? Thank you.